Alrighty, we are back, of course, talking that FF7. More interviews with our boy Naoki Hamaguchi. My god, it feels like in the last couple weeks he's done more interviews than he did for all of Rebirth's marketing. Kind of insane. This interview he has with WCCF Tech is actually pretty good, though. I think most of the question and answers are worth talking about. But the most interesting bit is them discussing DLC and the potential of them doing some DLC after the third game. I thought it was really interesting because I believe this is the first time they've ever discussed the possibility of there being DLC for the third game. They've talked about how there were plans for DLC for Rebirth at one point, and Hamaguchi also talks about that in this particular interview. To already be talking about DLC potentially for the third game, even though we've yet to see the third game, we have no idea anything about it in terms of the title, time frame, nothing, right? It's kind of crazy. So we're just going to hop right into it. Would you ever consider developing a mobile version of the Final Fantasy VII trilogy? Obviously, we do want to bring our games to a wider audience. When we look at the market landscape of the mobile side, particularly iPhone and Android users, we don't really feel that there's quite the demand to justify us creating a mobile port of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. If there is a demand, we would definitely want to look forward to hearing that. As of this moment, I don't think that demand is quite there yet from a business perspective. We'll continue to look at the market trends, and if there is the right opportunity at the right moment, that's when we'll revisit this topic. So I thought this was kind of a wild question and answer, just because it's not something I've even considered when we talk about the Remake trilogy and all the different ports and platforms and whatever. I've never even thought about mobile phones, and I don't even know, to be honest, how capable modern day phones are. I'm just not somebody that upgrades my phone all the time. I just do not give a shit. So your boy does not keep up on modern technology, so I have no idea like how capable a modern phone is. Like the most up-to-date phones, whatever they might be, how are they versus like the Switch 2, for example, since that's kind of on the lower end of like modern consoles. Like how comparable are they? Could a modern phone run something like FF7 Remake? You guys can let me know. But also, I'm unsure how fun like a fast-paced game like FF7 Remake would be on a mobile phone, right? I know you can get like peripheral attachments and stuff to modern phones and essentially turn them into like a Switch and handheld mode where you hook shit onto it and it's like holding a controller and a screen in the middle and shit, right? Like I've seen that. I think my brother has that. We used to play some like Call of Duty Mobile with that stuff and shit, like Fortnite and shit. So you could do that route. But if we're just talking about just holding your fucking phone in your hands, touch screen, trying to play like FF7 Remake, I don't know how fun that'd be. Are there any plans for a DLC to bridge the gap between Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the third title in the Remake project, similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade? There were definitely some ideas to create a Rebirth DLC, and that was the plan at a certain point in time. But when we revisited the topic and we thought about what our priorities should be and what the fans are looking forward to the most, we figured that what fans want the most is to bring the third installment as soon as possible. That would take priority over the Rebirth DLC, so we decided to take that approach. With that being said, once we release the third installment, there is a possibility of having a DLC for that third installment. With the conclusion of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, there's probably going to be a much wider audience for Final Fantasy as a whole. Whether we bring another new DLC or a full title, that's something we are actively considering. The last bit of that answer is really interesting because he mentions, the possibility of a new DLC after Part 3, but also he says a new title. But I don't know if he's saying something new for FF7 or just like a new title in general from his team at Square Enix or whatever. I'm not entirely sure. Hamaguchi's open to the idea of there being DLC for Part 3, which is really interesting. We're not going to go into like the discussion of theories and shit for what's happening with the remake games, but how the games conclude is definitely going to tell us what the potential DLC would be. If it ends in a drastically different manner to the original FF7, or if it ends the same as FF7 original, leading into like the compilation type shit, that obviously tell us more or less what the DLC would probably be. Maybe playable Advent Children, which is something a lot of people want. It's actually something I've talked about on the channel a long time ago. I did like a video of like 7 things I wanted or something from FF7 Remake, and this was before we even knew that the first game was going to be Midgar only. And one of the things I mentioned was a playable Advent Children, so like there's maybe that possibility now, which is kind of awesome. Like depending on how the third game ends, right, and how they conclude this trilogy, like there's so much possibilities for what a DLC could be for Part 3, so that's really, really interesting. But also the new title thing is really interesting too. Again, if it's an FF7 thing, like I don't know what that could be. Like what do you do for FF7 after the Remake trilogy is done, right? Because FF7 is not going anywhere. I don't know what they're going to do after the trilogy's done exactly, besides, maybe continuing support on Ever Crisis, if that's even still around at that time. And then maybe, like, remaking Dirge of Cerberus, but beyond of those two things, like, I don't know what you do after FF7 Remake trilogy is done for FF7, right? So if there's, like, a new title, potentially, who knows what the hell that could be. If it's just a new title separate from FF7 from Hamaguchi's team, then, like, again, we can't really know what that is, other than maybe Final Fantasy 17. Which we're actually told by Hamaguchi himself a few weeks ago that he's producing several titles, some of which have not been announced yet. So, FF17 is a possibility, but it could be a lot of other things. Who knows exactly? I also find it interesting when they bring up the topic of there potentially having been DLC for Rebirth, right? Just because there's people at one point that swore that was never going to happen. Like, there's no way they're going to do DLC for Part 2. They're just going to go directly into Part 3. And obviously that is true now. But as he said, and he said before in other interviews, like, there was plans for DLC at one point for Rebirth. I think it might have been this quote from Noir back in 2021 before we even got integrated in episode intermission, where people thought that there maybe wouldn't be DLC to after Part 3. And it says, due to the upgrade as a result, it became necessary to separate the additional parts of Yuffie by the name DLC. However, the original purpose was to make the PS5 version of FF7 Remake, not to make DLC. Therefore, there are no plans for DLC at this time. This time, by preparing the environment for PS5 with FF7 Remake integrated, the transition to the sequel development proceeded smoothly. We give top priority to the roadmap to completion, so if you need to think of it as DLC, I think it will be after completion. The wording on that is kind of weird, right? Because he talks about like after completion, the roadmap to completion, but he talks about the sequel as well. So it's like, are we saying that there's not going to be DLC until after Rebirth is completed, or at the time it's just Remake Part 2, we didn't even know the name, Rebirth yet? Or is he talking about the entire trilogy being completed, and then there might be DLC? We weren't entirely sure. So I remember us on the channel talking about the possibility of either, right? It might be one or the other. And there's so many people that were like so certain there wouldn't be DLC for Part 2. And again, that is true now, but there were plans for DLC for Rebirth, for Remake Part 2 back then at some point. I do wish they'd talk about what the potential DLC would have been, right? Because there's only like a few options realistically. It would have either been a DLC for something that takes place after Part 2, but leading into Part 3, right? Or it would have been DLC for something that takes place in the past. So, character building for maybe somebody like Vincent or Sid or both. Or it would have been something that takes place like during the events of Rebirth itself. Again, potentially following Sid and Vincent. Kind of what they were doing while our party was doing the main story. Like, to me, those are realistically the only things a DLC could have been for Part 2. So I wish they would talk about what their idea for DLC was, because there's no way it would, like, spoil anything for Part 3 that I could think of, right? But also, we discussed it on the channel before, did a whole video about it, that I personally think we needed DLC for Part 2, specifically a Vincent DLC, right? And I know people want to get to Part 3 as soon as possible, like Hamaguchi says. And I agree with that for the most part. But the thing is, like, there's so much to do in the third game in terms of just the main fucking story. There's just so much to do, right? And then you got to do like backstory and more story for the character of Yuffie, right? With the Wutai section, which now is going to be just a part of the main story. It's not an optional thing. But where do you incorporate the Vincent stuff? Because he has so much story to tell, especially with the compilation, right? With in the future Deep Ground stuff, of course, but also like his history with the Shinra Company and Hojo and Sephiroth and Lucrezia and the Proto-Materia and Chaos and fucking Omega Weapon and all that other shit. Like, there's just so much fucking story for the character of Vincent. How do you fit all that in to the third game alongside the main story, which is all of Disc 2 and Disc 3 still, right? Like, it's just not really realistic to me that they can incorporate all of his backstory, all of the other characters' stories. We also got Sid's fucking story. We don't really get to know Sid at all in Rebirth, right? So you got to incorporate like all of Yuffie's story, Vincent and Sid's, and then the rest of the main fucking story. So it's like, I don't know how they're going to do that unless it's just this massive, insanely large game. I don't know. This doesn't make sense. So I just felt like we kind of needed a DLC for Vincent for people that don't know the character to get to know the character. It's just one of those things that worries me a bit because Vincent is one of my favorite characters when it comes to FF7. And I just don't know if they're going to do him justice. I trust them too, but there's so much they need to cover in the third game for just the character of Vincent alone that I don't know how much they're going to actually do. I don't know. If enough fans ask for it, would you consider a standalone Queen's Blood game to be a priority? As I mentioned in my previous response, the utmost importance right now is to work hard towards the third installment and make sure it gets released as soon as possible with the highest quality achievable. Right now, the solo Queen's Blood title is probably not on the list of our priorities. We actually haven't determined any priorities after the release of the third installment, so things are really up in the air right now. If there's enough demand, a solo Queen's Blood title is definitely something we can consider. A couple things here. For one, my god, they've been asked this question so many times, right? Like around the release of Rebirth and obviously after Rebirth, a bunch of interviews. People ask them constantly about a solo Queen's Blood thing, so it's like, I don't really fault the person doing the interview to ask it, but it's like, my god, you know the answer already. Like, why are we asking this? Also on the flip side of that, right? Every time they're asked this question about a solo Queen's Blood game, they say kind of a similar thing of like, well, if there's enough demand, we'll consider maybe doing a standalone Queen's Blood game. And it's like, clearly there's fucking demand. Like, fans have been asking for that since the game came out. You ask this every other goddamn interview, it would seem, at least back then. People clearly want this. So maybe if you want to look a little too much into it, like maybe that's a subtle way of him saying that they are doing that or working on that because there's clearly demand. You have to be fucking blind to not see there's demand for it, right? So maybe they are kind of in the background working on that. They just don't want to obviously confirm it or announce it yet. Because of how big the demand is for it, it'd be very stupid for them not to do something with this, right? Like kind of break into that maybe like mobile card game genre. I don't know if you can do it on console too, maybe I guess like Hearthstone, that kind of thing, Gwent or whatever, Magic the Gathering arena, stuff like that, right? Kind of break into that market. It'd be kind of interesting and kind of update it and give new cards all the time and shit. That'd be awesome. That'd be pretty cool to have like an FF7 game like that they can constantly support, that I feel like it'd be easier for them to support than something like Ever Crisis, which has a lot that goes into it, right? The development of Ever Crisis has to be expensive. Like a mobile card game, I don't think would be that expensive. Plus it'd be kind of fun to actually like do PvP, right? Playing against each other and shit with Gwent. Gwent? Fuck. Maybe that's my sign I need to play some fucking Witcher 3 again. Queen's Blood. Doing PvP with Queen's Blood. Because even with the cards that are available in Rebirth, like there's a ton of different decks you can build, right? Different styles of decks and shit. So I think there could be like actually like a really fun PvP aspect to that game for like a mobile game or something. But my dudes, that'll pretty much be the video. Of course, pass off to you guys what your thoughts overall. The main talking point, of course, is DLC. Hamaguchi alluding to potentially there being DLC for Part 3. What the hell do you think that'd be? Obviously, that very much comes down to how the fucking trilogy ends. Like, we can't really guess it right now. But what do you think it could potentially be? But also, what do you think that theoretical DLC would have been for FF7 Rebirth? Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search numbers in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, ffvii. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine or leave it like Cobain.